devil went up to PA. He was looking for a dick to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind and he was willing to make a deal. When he came across a middle-aged man wearing a dress and wearing it hot, and the devil jumped up on a hickory stump and said, "Boy, tell me what you got." I guess you didn't know it, but I'm a transvestite too, and if you'd care to take it there, I'll make a bet with you. Now you make a pretty good woman, boy, but give the devil his due. I'll bet a bra full of gold against your soul, 'cause I think I'm hotter than you. The man said, "My name's Richard, and it might be a sin, but I'll take your bet you're going to regret, 'cause I'm the hottest there's ever been." Richard, rosy up your cheeks and cinch your corset hard, 'cause hell's broke loose in PA and the trans devil deals the cards. And if you win this shiny bra, a triple D man wrecker, but if you lose, the devil gets your pecker. Devil opened up his wardrobe, said, "I'll get us rockin'," and fire flew from his fingertips as he pulled up his fishnet stockings, and he buttoned up his garters next, and they made an evil hiss. And then he twerked the night away to a song that went like this. When the devil finished, Richard said, "Well, you're pretty good, my dear, but sit down in that chair right there, 'cause there's another twerker here. Fire on the mountain, run, girl, run. There's lingerie sale and it ends at 1. Picking out some briefs and some lacy thongs. It's a real good sale, but it don't last long." The devil bowed his head because he knew that he'd been beat, and he laid that golden triple D on the ground at Richard's feet. Rich said, "Devil, come back anytime, for there's more that you ain't seen. And remember my name, you son of a bitch, Admiral Danglin' Dick Levine. Run, run, bullet, run. There's lingerie sale and it ends at 1. Picking out some briefs and some lacy thongs. It's a real good sale, but it don't last long."
Damn near killed him.
From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I will give you $5 and let you pick the opening segment on Friday if you can find me a pre-transition picture of the artist formerly known as Dr. Richard Levine of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I want to open with a trivia question tonight. What is the only cabinet-level agency in the U.S. government that was created by executive order? I'm not going to whistle the Jeopardy theme song, but I will give you a few moments to ponder your answer, and I think that's just about long enough. The answer is the Environmental Protection Agency. The president was Richard Nixon, whom we never talk about on this program. In fact, I think this is the first time ever. The date? Wednesday, 2 December 1970, so 2 months short of the 1-year mark of his first term. But wait, I hear you say, isn't it kind of weird for a conservative Republican president to be massively expanding the central government by executive fiat? Why, yes. Yes, it is. But as it turns out, the Democrats in Congress in 1970 didn't think there was any need for an environmental protection agency. Well, actually, no, maybe that's not quite all the way correct. They may have privately recognized the need for something like the EPA to exist, but they weren't about to express that support publicly, much less vote for the thing. And why was that? Well, because a big part of the reason why we needed an EPA was because there were so many environmental disaster areas left over from the big public works projects of the previous 40 years, most of which arose out of FDR's New Deal and LBJ's Great Society. If you were a kid in the 1960s, there is a not insignificant chance that you and your friends used to play in a dump site where nobody would be allowed to go without hazmat gear on today. But in the minds of the Democrats in 1970, and we all know how the minds of idiot politicians work, they said, well, we can't vote to create this EPA thingy because that's a tacit admission that the projects we've been touting and supporting for all these years have wreaked a fair bit of havoc on our country's natural environment. So Nixon says, look, it's not really my style to create new central government bureaucracies out of whole cloth, but god damn it, we need to start cleaning this stuff up because it's pretty goddamn shameful that we should have goddamn industrial waste sites that kids are walking through to get to their goddamn elementary school in the morning. God damn it. Nixon and Ted Williams, history's two most skilled practitioners of the words goddamn and goddamn it. No, I know you didn't ask, but I goddamn well told you anyway. So Nixon signs the order, and the EPA is thus duly created, and the executive order has the desired effect. The Democrats' obstructionism causes them considerable public embarrassment, and within 6 months' time, the Congress has passed enabling legislation that basically ratifies everything the president did with the executive order and puts the thing on a bit of a more solid legal footing, though it would have been interesting to see how that might have all played out in the courts if the enabling legislation had never been passed, if the president just wished a cabinet agency into existence and left it in place without any sort of legislative foundation. I would have to think it would have been struck down fairly swiftly, but it's not like there's any precedent we can refer to, so I guess it remains an open question to ponder for another time. But over the course of the next 6 or 7 years after the EPA gets created, through the premature end of Nixon's second term and Jerry Ford's accidental presidency, because how many guys can say they got elected to Congress and wound up president? Right up through the Mr. Peanut era, and then it started becoming all too painfully clear that the EPA, as it was originally constituted, was woefully unable to do some of the things that it most urgently needed to do, and the mistake is right there in the name. Environmental Protection Agency. It was more oriented toward protection to begin with, that is to say, toward preventing future environmental degradation than it was toward the mitigating and remediation of current environmental disaster sites. Another problem was that there wasn't any sort of rapid response capability baked into the cake of the 1970 executive order and the subsequent enabling legislation. So if there was some sort of a leak or a spill or some other sudden catastrophe, it was being responded to in the same way and by the same people as it would have been pre-1970. So the agency that we created to better safeguard the natural environment didn't really have any power or capacity to act in an emergency fashion in real time in response to actively unfolding incidents. And so everybody could see by the time the calendar flipped to 1980 that a fairly substantial remedy was going to be required. And we gave the remedy its very own comic book hero name and everything. We called it Superfund. Faster than a chemical spill, more powerful than a weeping Indian, able to leap tall industrial waste dumps in a single bound. Superfund was a subsidiary branch of the EPA that was brought into being under the auspices of the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act of 1980, and this may come as a shock to some of our viewers under 35, but yes, there did used to be a time when Congress gave names to laws that bore some relationship with the law's contents, whereas today we live in a world where the President of the United States, in his State of the Union address, with a perfectly straight face and total sincerity, says things like, quote, "The Inflation Reduction Act is the biggest investment we've ever made in climate change," end quote. And in other news, I never go swimming without my bicycle, and I'm sure you don't either, because that would be crazy. And though you may be shocked to hear me, of all people, speak in a complimentary fashion about a government-expanding piece of legislation from within my own lifetime, Superfund was a good piece of legislation. It largely did the things that it was designed to do. So over the course of the 1980s, the decade in which your host came of age, we went from being a country where kids tromping through toxic waste dumps on their way to school was a distressingly commonplace occurrence to being a country where such things largely didn't happen anymore, period. And here we have a story, one of those all too rare stories of a federal government expansion that was a good and proper thing, that did what it was supposed to do, and by which the people of the country actually gained a material benefit. And I would submit that it is the only such federal government expansion in the last 50 years that fits that description, and which I would not wipe from existence on the first day if they made me Emperor of America. All the others I would get rid of. Literally all of them, except EPA and Superfund. But here's the thing about Superfund. Historically, around 3/4 of the funding that Superfund has used to mitigate and remediate hazardous waste sites has been collected from responsible parties or potentially responsible parties, RPs and PRPs respectively. From the creation of Superfund in 80 up through 1995, the lion's share of its operations were funded through an excise tax on oil and gas companies. But the Newt Gingrich Republican Congress that took power in 1994, they were operating in the steadfast belief that all tax cuts are good tax cuts, and eliminating a federal tax will always have desirable results and never any unintended consequences. So they duly got rid of the excise tax that had been funding Superfund for the entire 15 years of its existence up to that point. And ever since then, Superfund hasn't really had any dedicated funding source of which to speak. It's just a line item that gets squeezed into these monstrous omnibus spending bills that we always are reading about, along with 100,000 other line items. And what have the real world effects of this been? Well, they ain't good. In 1994, the last year of funding under the original excise tax, Superfund cleaned up 1,200 toxic waste sites in the United States. By 2014, that number was 8. Things got so bad that in November of 2021, Congress moved to reauthorize the Superfund excise tax, which brings us to Friday, 3 February 2023, East Palestine, Ohio, Palestine, Ohio, whichever you prefer, 8:55 Standard Time. It's already far and away the worst environmental disaster in the 48 contiguous United States since before there was an EPA or Superfund. And if history winds up recording the name of this incident as Joe Biden's Chernobyl, well, I would be really honored if I was remembered as the man who coined that term. So please do remember you heard it here first. There were 141 cars on that train that derailed in East Palestine for reasons that still are not entirely clear. But what is entirely clear is that there will be, and already has been, if you happen to like animals, a massively unacceptable loss of life associated with this incident. And you may have found yourself thinking, as I've found myself thinking these past few days, that this is the sort of thing we have never witnessed in the United States of America within at least half a century. Many hundreds of tons of very hazardous carcinogens have been released into the air, and probably the groundwater supply, among them phosgene, hydrogen chloride, butyl acrylate, ethyl hexylacrylate, ethylene glycol, monobutyl ether, isobutylene, and good old-fashioned benzene. In other words, the type of things that you normally only read about on a frickin' shampoo bottle, but will probably put you into an early grave if you should happen to breathe them in aerosolized form for days or weeks on end. But the response of the federal government has been, I almost feel like calling it indifferent would be giving them too much credit. We have got an unfolding incident that could very well be the worst environmental catastrophe in the American interior in the last 100 years. Domestic and farm animals have already begun dropping dead en masse. There are widespread reports of residents experiencing medical issues from the clouds of toxic gas that are being dispersed over their neighborhoods like mustard gas at the fucking Somme. And yet, the federal government response seems tepid at best and nearly non-existent at worst. And why do you suppose that is? Well, one thing we never do on this program is nibble around the edges, and we damn well ain't going to start now, so let's just put the question out there. Would the federal response to this incident be similarly disinterested if this derailment happened in, say, Chicago, New Orleans, maybe East St. Louis. If this happened in a community that was 98% poor black people instead of 98% poor white people, do you think these American citizens would be left to fend for themselves as they have been? Do you think the mainstream news media would refuse to cover the story as they have been doing? Do you think Joe Biden and Mayor Pete and Kamala Harris would all not give one single goddamn about any of it? Yeah, me either. But this is where we are now. So I would advise everybody to take a good long look at what apartheid government looks like. Whether anybody wants to acknowledge the reality or not, we live in a country where laws are enforced and services provided according to what color you are and whether that color is one that the Democrat Party deems important to their chances of winning the next election. Therefore, if you are a 98% white little town where 70% of the voters supported Donald Trump in the last election, well, have fun burying your dead animals and enjoy your early death from some exotic form of cancer. Just don't get up your hopes that Joe or Kamala are going to show up for a photo op at your funeral, because they totally are not. Your funeral will not earn them any glowing reviews on MSNBC or in the pages of the Washington Post. What, you want us to cry for poor dead white people? Come on. Obviously that's racist. But the worst part is, even if the federal government wanted to respond to this incident in the way to which we have grown accustomed, they couldn't. Superfund is still a hell of a long way from being replenished again and having the operational capacity to respond effectively to incidents like this one. And our transportation secretary is a guy who lists "I like choo-choo trains" as his number one qualification for the job. And if the rumors are true that are circulating in the gay conservative community, I didn't say this, but other people have said it, he might not even be a real homosexual. And what a betrayal that would be, am I right? So if I were you, and I lived within 10 miles of any train tracks whatsoever, I would close my eyes and pray each night that all the conductors stay sober, that all the equipment remains in good working order, and my town doesn't have the misfortune of becoming the next East Palestine. And if your political tribalism leads you to total indifference over the suffering of your fellow countrymen, I would think long and hard before the next time you shake your woke, virtuous tail feathers in somebody's face and presume to stand on the moral high ground. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. I will see you Friday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.